Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we'll be doing more A Testament of Hope by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We'll be continuing the Playboy interview we were reading from the last episode, so let's go ahead and just jump into this. Playboy. Is this the sole aim of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference? King. We have five aims. First, to stimulate nonviolent direct mass action to expose and remove the barriers of segregation and discrimination. Second, to disseminate the creative philosophy and techniques of nonviolence through local and area workshops. Third, to secure the right and unhampered use of the ballot for every citizen. Fourth, to achieve full citizenship rights and the total integration of the Negro into American life. And fifth, to reduce the cultural lag through our citizenship training program. Playboy. How does SCLC select the cities where nonviolent campaigns and demonstrations are engaged? King. The operational area of SCLC is the entire South, where we have affiliated organizations in some 85 cities. Our major campaigns have been conducted only in the cities where a request for our help comes from one of these affiliate organizations, and only when we feel that intolerable conditions in that community might be ameliorated with our help. I will give you an example. In Birmingham, one of the affiliate organizations in the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, which was organized by the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, a most energetic and indomitable man, it was he who set out to end Birmingham's racism, challenging the terrorist reign of Bull Connor. SCLC watched admiringly as the small Shuttlesworth led organization fought in the Birmingham courts and with boycotts. Shuttlesworth was jailed several times. His home and church were bombed, and still he did not back down. His defiance of Birmingham's racism inspired and encouraged Negroes throughout the South. Then, at a May 1962 board meeting of the SCLC in Chattanooga, the first discussions began that later led to our joining Shuttlesworth's organization in a massive direct action campaign to attack Birmingham's segregation. Playboy. One of the highlights of that campaign was our celebrated letter from a Birmingham jail, or your celebrated letter from a Birmingham jail, written during one of your jail terms for civil disobedience, an eloquent reply to 8 Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish clergymen who had criticized your activities in Birmingham. Do you feel that subsequent events have justified the sentiments expressed in your letter? King. I would say yes. 2 or 3 important and constructive things have happened which can be at least partially attributed to that letter. By now, nearly 1 million copies of the letter have been widely circulated in churches of most of the major denominations. It helped to focus greater internal attention international attention upon what was happening in Birmingham. And I'm sure that without Birmingham, the March on Washington wouldn't have been called, which, in my mind, was one of the most creative steps the Negro struggle has taken. The March on Washington spurred the galvanization and galvanized the consciences of millions. It gave the American Negro a new national and international stature. The press of the world recorded the story as nearly a quarter of a million Americans, white and black, assembled in grandeur as a testimonial to the Negro's determination to achieve freedom in this generation. It was also the image of Birmingham, which, to a great extent, helped to bring the Civil Rights Bill into being in 1963. Previously, President Kennedy had decided not to propose it that year, feeling that it would so arouse the South that it would meet a bottleneck. But Birmingham and subsequent developments caused him to reorder his legislative priorities. One of these decisive developments was our last major campaign before the enactment of the Civil Rights Act in St. Augustine, Florida. We received a plea for help from a Robert Hayling, the leader of the St. Augustine movement. St. Augustine, America's oldest city and one of the most segregated cities in America, was a stronghold of the KKK and the John Birch Society. Such things had happened as Klansmen abducting four Negroes and beating them unconscious with clubs, brass knuckles, axe handles, and pistol butts. Dr. Haling's home had been shot up with buckshot. Three Negro homes had been bombed and several Negro nightclubs shotgunned. A Negro's car had been destroyed by fire because his child was one of the 6 Negro children permitted to attend white schools. And the homes of 2 of the Negro children in the white schools had been burned down. Many Negroes had been fired from jobs that some had worked on for 28 years because they were somehow connected with the demonstrations. Police had beaten and arrested Negroes for picketing, marching, and singing freedom songs. Many Negroes had served up to 90 days in jail for demonstrating against segregation, and 4 teenagers had spent 6 months in jail for picketing. Then, on February the 7th of that year, Dr. Haling's home was shotgunned a second time, with his pregnant wife and 2 children barely escaping death. The family dog was killed while standing behind the living room door. So SCLC decided to join in last year's celebration of St. Augustine's Gala 400th birthday as America's oldest city by converting it into a nonviolent battleground. This is just what we did. Playboy. But isn't it true, Dr. King, that during this and other nonviolent demonstrations, violence has occurred, sometimes resulting in hundreds of casualties on both sides? King. Yes, in part that is true. But what is always overlooked is how few people, in ratio to the numbers involved, have been casualties. An army on maneuvers against no enemy suffers casualties, even fatalities. A minimum of whites have been casualties in demonstrations solely because our teaching of nonviolence disciplines our followers not to fight even if attacked. A minimum of Negroes are casualties for two reasons. Their white oppressors know that the world watches their actions, and for the first time they are being faced by Negroes who display no fear. Playboy. It is shortly after your St. Augustine campaign last summer, as you mentioned, that the Civil Rights Bill was passed, outlawing many of the injustices you have been demonstrate which you had been demonstrating throughout the South. Predictably, it was promptly anathematized as unconstitutional and excessive in its concessions to Negro demands. How do you feel about it? King. I don't feel that the Civil Rights Act has gone far enough in some of its coverage. In the first place, it needs a stronger voting section. You will never have a true democracy until you can eliminate all restrictions. We need to do away with restrictive literacy tests. I've seen too much of Native intelligence to accept the validity of these tests as a criterion for voting qualifications. Our nation needs a universal method of voter registration. One man, one vote, literally. Second, there is a pressing, urgent need to give the Attorney General the right to initiate federal suits in any area of civil rights denial. Third, we need a strong and strongly enforced fair housing section, such as many states already have. President Kennedy initiated the present housing law, but it is not broad enough. Fourth, we need an extension of FEPC to grapple more effectively with the problems of poverty. Not only are millions of Negroes caught in the clutches of poverty, but millions of poor whites as well. And fifth, conclusive and effective measures must be taken immediately at the federal level to curb the worsening reign of terror in the South, which is aided and abetted, as everyone knows, by state and local law enforcement agencies. It's getting so that anybody can kill a Negro and get away with it in the South, as long as they go through the motions of a jury trial. There is very little chance of conviction from lily white Southern jurors. It must be fixed so that the case of interracial murder, the federal government can prosecute. Playboy. Your dissatisfaction with the Civil Rights Act reflects that of most other Negro spokesmen. According to recent polls, however, many whites resent this attitude, calling the Negro ungrateful and unrealistic to press his demands for more. King. This is a litany of us in the field. What more will the Negro want? What will it take to make these demonstrations end? Well, I would like to reply with another rhetorical question. Why do white people seem to find it difficult to understand that the Negro is sick and tired of having reluctantly parceled out to him those rights and privileges which all others receive upon birth or entry in America. I never cease to wonder at the amazing presumption of much of white society, assuming that they have the um, right to bargain with the Negro for his freedom. This continued arrogant ladling out of pieces of rights of citizenship has been to generate a fury in the Negro. Even so, he is not pressing for revenge or for conquest, or to gain spoils, or to enslave, or even to marry the sisters of those who have injured him. What the Negro wants, and will not stop until he gets, is absolute and unqualified freedom and equality here in this land of his birth, and not in Africa or in some imaginary state. The Negro no longer will be tolerant of anything less than his due right and heritage. He is pursuing only that which he knows is honorably his. He knows that he is right, but every Negro leader since the turn of the century has been saying this in one form or another. It is because we have been so long and so conscientiously ignored by the dominant white society that the situation has now reached such crisis proportions. For few white people, even today, will face the clear fact that the very future and destiny of this country are tied up in what answer will be given to the Negro. And that answer must be given soon. Playboy. Relatively few dispute the justness of the struggle to eradicate racial injustice, but many whites feel that the Negro should be more patient, that only the passage of time, perhaps generations, will bring about the sweeping changes he demands in traditional attitudes and customs. Do you think this is true? King. No, I do not. I feel that the time is always right to do what is right. Where progress for the Negro in America is concerned, there is a tragic misconception of time among whites. They seem to cherish a strange, irrational notion that something in the very flow of time will cure all ills. In truth, time itself is only neutral. Increasingly, I feel that time has been used destructively by people of ill will much more than it has been used constructively by those of goodwill. If I were to select a timetable for the equalization of human rights, it would be the intent of the all deliberate speed specified in the historic 1954 Supreme Court decision. But what happened? A Supreme Court decision was met and balked with utter defiance. 10 years later, in most areas of the South, less than 1% of the Negro children have been integrated in schools, and some of the deepest South, not even 1/10 of 1%. Approximately 25% of employable Negro youth for another example, are presently unemployed. Though many would prefer not to, we must face the fact that progress for the Negro, to which white moderates like to point in justifying gradualism, has been relatively insignificant, particularly in terms of the Negro masses. What little progress has been made, and that includes the Civil Rights Act, has applied primarily to the middle class Negro. Among the masses, especially in the northern ghettos, the situation remains about the same, and for some, it is worse. Playboy. It would seem that much could be done at the local, state, and federal levels to remedy those inequities. In your own contact with them, you have found government officials in the North, if not in the South, to be generally sympathetic, understanding, and receptive to appeals for reform. King, on the contrary, I have been dismayed at the degree to which abysmal ignorance seems to prevail among many state, city, and even federal officials on the whole question of racial justice and injustice. Particularly, I have found that these men seriously and dangerously underestimate the explosive mood of the Negro and the gravity of the crisis, even among those whom I would consider to be both sympathetic and sincerely intellectually committed. There is a lamentable lack of understanding. But this white failure to comprehend the depth and dimension of the Negro problem is far from being peculiar to government officials. Apart from bigots and backlashers, it seems to be a malady even among the whites who like to regard themselves as enlightened. I would especially refer to those who counsel wait, and to those who say that they sympathize with our goals but cannot condone our methods of direct action and pursuit of these goals. I wonder at men who dare to feel that they have some paternalistic right to set the timetable for another man's liberation. Over the past several years, I must say, I have been gravely disappointed with such white moderates. I am often inclined to think that they are more of a stumbling block to the Negro's progress than the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner. Playboy. Haven't both of these segregationist societies been implicated in connection with plots against your life? King. It's difficult to trace the authorship of these death threats. I seldom go through a day without one. Some are telephoned anonymously to my office, others are sent unsigned, of course, through the mails. Drew Pearson wrote not long ago about one group of unknown affiliation that was committed to assassinate not only me, but also Chief Justice Warren and President Johnson. And not long ago, when I was about to visit in Mississippi, I received some very urgent calls from Negro leaders in Mobile who had been told by a very reliable source that a sort of guerrilla group led by a retired major in the area of Luceyville, Mississippi, was plotting to take my life during the visit. I was strongly urged to cancel the trip, but when I thought about it, I decided that I had no alternative but to go into Mississippi. Playboy. Why? King. Because I have a job to do. If I were constantly worried about death, I couldn't function. After a while, if your life is more or less constantly in peril, you come to a point where you accept the possibility philosophically. I must face the fact, as all others in positions of leadership must do, that America today is an extremely sick nation and that something could well happen to me at any time. I feel, though, that my cause is so right, so moral, that if I should lose my life in some way, it would aid the cause. Playboy. The statement That statement exemplifies the total dedication to the civil rights movement for which you are so widely admired, but also denounced as an extremist by such segregationist spokesmen as Alabama's Governor Wallace. Do you accept this identification? King. It disturbed me when I first heard it, but when I began to consider the true meaning of the word, I decided that perhaps I would like to think of myself as an extremist, in the light of the spirit which made Jesus an extremist for love. If it sounds as though I am comparing myself to the Savior, let me remind you that all who honor themselves with the claim of being Christians should compare themselves to Jesus. Thus, I consider myself an extremist for that brotherhood of man which Paul so nobly expressed. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. Love is the only force on earth that can be dispensed or received in an extreme manner without any qualifications, without any harm to the giver or to the receiver. Playboy, perhaps, but the kind of extremism for which you've been criticized has to do not with love, but with your advocacy of willful disobedience of what you consider to be unjust laws. Do you feel you have the right to pass judgment and defy the law, non-violently or otherwise? King, yes, morally, if not legally. For there are two kinds of laws, man's and God's. A man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God is just law. But a man-made code that is unharmonious with the moral law is an unjust law. And an unjust law, as St. Augustine said, is no law at all. Thus, a law that is unjust is morally null and void and must be defied until it is legally null and void as well. Let us not forget, in the memories of 6 million who died, that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and that everything the freedom fighters in Hungary did was illegal. In spite of that, I am sure that if I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers if I had lived in Germany during Hitler's reign, as some Christian priests and ministers did do, often at the cost of their lives. And if I lived now in a communist country where principles dear to the Christian's faith are suppressed, I know that I would openly advocate defiance of that country's anti religious laws. Again, just as some Christian priests and ministers are doing today behind the Iron Curtain. Right here in America today, there are white ministers, priests, rabbis who have shed blood in the support of our struggle against a web of human injustice, much of which is supported by immoral man made laws. Playboy, segregation laws. King, specifically court injunctions. Though the rights of the First Amendment guarantees that any citizen or group of citizens may engage in peaceable assembly, the South has seized upon the device of invoking injunctions to block our direct action civil rights demonstrations. When you get set to stage a nonviolent demonstration, the city simply secures an injunction to cease and desist. Southern courts are well known for sitting on this type of case. Conceivably, a 2 or 3 year delay could be incurred. At first, we found this to be a highly effective subterfuge against us. We first experienced it in Montgomery when, during the bus boycott, our carpool was outlawed by an injunction. An injunction also destroyed the protest movement in Talladega, Alabama. Another injunction outlawed the oldest civil rights organization, the NAACP, from the host state of Alabama. Still another injunction thwarted our organization's efforts in Albany, Georgia. Then, in Birmingham, we felt that we had to take a stand and disobey a court injunction against demonstrations, knowing the consequences of being prepared and being prepared to meet them, or the unjust law would break our movement. We did not take this step hastily or rashly. We gave the matter intense thought and prayer before deciding that the first thing was being done. And when we made our decision, I announced our plan to the press, making it clear that we were not anarchists advocating lawlessness, but that in good conscience we could not comply with a misuse of the judicial process in order to perpetuate injustice and segregation. When our plan was made known, it bewildered and immobilized our segregationist opponents. We felt that our decision had been morally as well as tactically right, all keeping in with God's law as well as with spirit of our nonviolent direct action program. Playboy. If it's morally right for supporters of civil rights to violate segregation laws which they consider unjust, Why is it wrong for segregationists to resist the enforcement of integration laws which they consider unjust? King, because segregation, as even the segregationists know in their hearts, is morally wrong and sinful. If it weren't, the white South would not be haunted as it is by this deep sense of guilt for what it has done to the Negro. Guilt of patronizing him, degrading him, brutalizing him, depersonalizing him, thingifying him. Guilt for lying to itself. This is the source of the schizophrenia that the South will suffer until it goes through its crisis of conscience. Playboy, is this crisis imminent? King, it may not come next week or next year, but it is certainly more imminent in the South than in the North. If the South is honest with itself, it may outdistance the North in the improvement of race relations. Playboy, why? King, well, the Northern white, having had little actual contact with the Negro, is devoted to an abstract principle of cordial interracial relations. The Negro or the North has long considered, in a theoretical way, that it supported brotherhood and the equality of man. But the truth is that deep prejudices and discriminations exist in hidden and subtle and covert disguises. The South's prejudice and discrimination, on the other hand, has been applied against the Negro in obvious, open, overt, and glaring forms, which make the problem easier to get at. The Southern white man has the advantage of far more actual contact with Negroes than the Northerner. A major problem is that this contact has been paternalistic and poisoned by the myth of racial superiority. Playboy, any Southern whites, supported by the research of several Southern anthropologists, vow that white racial superiority and Negro inferiority are a biological fact. King, you may you may remember that during the rise of Nazi Germany, a rash of books by respected German scientists appeared supporting the master race theory. This utterly ignorant fallacy has been thoroughly refuted by the social scientists uh, um, as well as by medical science. That any individual who goes on believing it is standing in an absolutely misguided and diminishing circle. The American Anthropological Association has unanimously adopted a resolution repudiating statements that Negroes are biologically in innate mental ability or in any other way inferior to whites. The collective weight and authority of world scientists are embodied in a UNESCO report on races which flatly refutes the theory of innate superiority among any ethnic group. And as far as Negro blood is concerned, medical science finds the same four blood types in all race groups. When the Southern white finally accepts this simple fact, as he eventually must, beautiful results will follow, for we will have come a long way toward transforming his master servant perspective into a person to person perspective. The Southern white man discovering the non myth Negro exhibits all the passion of the new convert, seeing the black man as a man among men for the first time. The South, if it is to survive economically, must make dramatic changes, and these must include the Negro. People of goodwill in the South, who are the vast majority, have the challenge to be open and honest and to turn a deaf ear to the shrill cries of the irresponsible few on the lunatic fringe. I think and pray they will. Playboy, whom do you include among the irresponsible few? King, I include those who preach racism and commit violence, and those who, in various cities where we have sought to peacefully demonstrate, have sought to goad Negroes into violence as an excuse for violent mass reprisal. In Birmingham, for example, on the day it was flashed about the world that a peace pact had been signed between the moderate whites and the Negroes, Birmingham's segregationist forces reacted with fury, swearing vengeance against the white businessmen who had betrayed them by negotiating with Negroes. On Saturday night, just outside of Birmingham, a KKK meeting was held, and that same night, as I mentioned earlier, a bomb ripped the home of my brother, the Reverend A.D. King, and another bomb was planted where it would have killed or seriously wounded ev- um, anyone in the motel room which I had been occupying. Both bombs had been timed just as Birmingham's bars closed on Saturday midnight, as the streets filled with thousands of Negroes who were not trained in nonviolence and who had been drinking, just as whoever planted the bombs and wanted to happen, fighting began. Police were stoned by Negroes. Cars were overturned and fires started. Playboy, were none of your SCLC workers involved? King, if they had been, there would have been no riot, or we believe that only just means may have been used in seeking a just end. We believe that lasting gains can be made, and they have been made only by practicing what we preach, a policy of nonviolent peaceful protest. The riots, north and south, have involved mobs, not the disciplined, nonviolent, direct action demonstrators with whom I identify. We do not condone lawlessness, looting, and violence committed by the racist or the reckless of any color. I must say, however, that riots have such as have occurred do achieve at least one partially positive effect. They dramatically focus national attention upon the Negro's discontent. Unfortunately, they also give the white majority an excuse, a provocation, to look away from the cause of the riots. The poverty of the deprivation and the degradation of the Negro, especially in the slums and ghettos where the riots occur, and to talk instead of looting and of the breakdown of law and order. It is never circulated that some of the looters have been white people, similarly motivated by their own poverty. In one riot in a northern city, aside from the Negroes and Puerto Ricans who were arrested, there were also 150 white people, including mothers stealing food, children's shoes, and other necessary items. The poor, white and black, were rebelling together against the establishment. And I'm going to end today's video there because we went on for quite a while here. But yeah, Dr. King continues to speak about what the movement is going through and what he is trying to accomplish. And again, you can, as I've pointed out in previous videos, you can draw the connection with the um, protests over the last year or two, especially following the death of George Floyd. The hands up protests and everything like that. Many go, oh, but there are violence there. Well, as King has pointed out, even in his day, with his protests, there was violence. You cannot judge a movement by the violent actors. You simply, it's simply used as an excuse to look away by many. But yeah. But anyway, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.